A serial killer terrorizes an entire city for over a year, breaking into homes while families sleep, attacking victims with their own axes, and then simply vanishing into the night. The police are baffled, the community is paralyzed with fear, and then the killer does something unprecedented in criminal history. He writes a letter to the newspapers, claiming to be a demon from hell, announcing exactly when he plans to strike next, and offering a bizarre deal. If residents play jazz music in their homes on a specific night, he'll spare them. The entire city complies, filling the streets with music, and true to his word, no one dies that night. Then, just as mysteriously as he appeared, the Axeman of New Orleans stops killing and is never identified. For over a century, investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths have tried to answer one haunting question. Who was the Axeman of New Orleans, and why did he suddenly disappear? New analysis of the crimes, modern criminal profiling, and a fresh look at overlooked suspects are bringing us closer to understanding one of America's most bizarre unsolved serial killer cases. Welcome back to Crime Scout, True Stories. The Axeman of New Orleans operated during 1918 and 1919, a period when America was dealing with World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic. In the chaos of that era, a killer moved through the night, and his identity remains unknown to this day. Let's examine what we know, what we suspect, and whether this century-old mystery can ever be solved. The first attack attributed to the Axeman occurred on May 23, 1918. Joseph and Catherine Maggio, an Italian immigrant couple who ran a small grocery store, were attacked while they slept in their apartment behind the store. An intruder had chiseled out a panel in the back door to gain entry, a technique that would become the Axeman's signature. Once inside, he attacked the couple with Joseph's own axe, which was found outside covered in blood. Both victims had their throats slashed with a straight razor. Joseph died at the scene, Catherine died during surgery. Near the bodies, investigators found a cryptic message chalked on the sidewalk that read, "Mrs. Maggio is going to sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony." This referred to a similar unsolved murder from 1911, suggesting either the same killer or someone aware of the earlier crime. The brutality shocked New Orleans, but it was just the beginning. On June 28, 1918, a baker named John Zanka heard screaming from a neighboring apartment. He found Louis Bessumer and his mistress Harriet Lowe both wounded, attacked in the same manner as the Maggios. A door panel had been chiseled out, and the victims were struck with an axe. Both survived initially, though Harriet died weeks later. Before she died, she gave conflicting statements about who attacked them, at one point even implicating Bessumer himself, which complicated the investigation. The attacks continued throughout 1918 and into 1919, following a disturbing pattern. The victims were predominantly Italian immigrants or people of Italian descent. The killer entered homes by removing door panels with a chisel, never breaking windows or forcing locks. He used axes or straight razors found at the victims' homes, never bringing his own weapons. The attacks occurred while victims slept, usually in the early morning hours. After the violence, the killer simply disappeared, leaving behind only bloody footprints that led nowhere and chiseled door panels as his calling card. What made the Axeman different from typical burglars or even other serial killers was the apparent lack of motive. Nothing was stolen from the homes. The attacks weren't sexual in nature. There seemed to be no personal connection between the killer and victims. The randomness was terrifying because it meant anyone could be next. The Italian community was particularly gripped with fear, as the majority of victims were of Italian origin, leading to theories about mafia connections or ethnic targeting. Then came the letter that made the Axeman legendary. On March 13, 1919, newspapers in New Orleans received a letter claiming to be from the killer. Written in a theatrical, almost mocking tone, the letter began, "Hell, March 13, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans." The writer claimed to be a demon, not a human, and stated, "I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned." He specified the date and time, Tuesday, March 19, at 12:15 a.m., St. Joseph's Night. The letter was signed The Axeman. Whether it was genuinely from the killer or an elaborate hoax has been debated for decades. But the impact was immediate and extraordinary. On March 19, 1919, New Orleans became the loudest city in America. Jazz music poured from every home, bar, and dance hall. People threw parties, hired musicians, played phonographs at full volume, anything to comply with the Axeman's demands. It was a surreal scene, an entire city dancing to avoid death. And remarkably, no attacks occurred that night. But the Axeman wasn't finished. On August 10, 1919, he struck again. Sarah Lawman was attacked in her home but survived. Then, on October 27, 1919, came what would be the final attack. Mike Pepitone, a grocer, was killed in his bed while his wife and children slept in another room. His wife heard the commotion and saw a shadowy figure fleeing but couldn't identify the attacker. The axe was found outside, covered in blood, the door panel chiseled out, all the familiar signatures. And then, nothing. The Axeman never struck again. There's a peculiar epilogue to the Pepitone murder. In December 1920, over a year after the attack, Mike Pepitone's widow, Rose, traveled to Los Angeles. There, she encountered a man named Joseph Mumford on a street corner and shot him dead. She claimed Mumford was the Axeman who had killed her husband. Mumford was a career criminal with a long record. Rose was convicted of murder but served only 3 years. Some investigators at the time believed she genuinely identified the killer. But there was never any concrete evidence linking Mumford to the New Orleans attacks, and Rose offered no explanation for how she recognized him. To this day, it's unclear if Mumford was actually the Axeman or if Rose simply took revenge on someone she suspected. Modern criminal profilers have analyzed the Axeman case and developed theories about his identity and motives. The use of victims' own weapons suggests he didn't plan to kill when he entered, or that he wanted to create a specific psychological effect by using domestic tools against their owners. The chiseled door panels indicate someone with carpentry or construction knowledge, someone patient and methodical. The targeting of Italian grocers and their families suggests either ethnic hatred or knowledge of community patterns, perhaps someone familiar with the neighborhood. Some researchers believe the Axeman was actually multiple killers, that some attacks were genuine serial crimes while others were copycat killings or domestic violence staged to look like Axeman attacks. This theory explains the inconsistencies in victim profiles and attack methods. However, the signature entry method, the chiseled panel, was not widely publicized initially, making it harder for copycats to replicate accurately. Another theory suggests the killer was a mafia enforcer targeting Italian immigrants who refused to pay protection money. The theatrical letter could have been misdirection, making the crimes seem random and supernatural when they were actually calculated hits. But this doesn't explain why some victims had no known mob connections or why the killings stopped abruptly. The timing of the attacks, during World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic, is significant. New Orleans was in chaos. Police resources were stretched thin. Public attention was divided. Disease and death were everywhere. It was the perfect environment for a killer to operate. Some historians believe the Axeman might have been a soldier passing through New Orleans, which would explain the sudden start and stop of the crimes. Military records from the period have been examined, but no conclusive suspect has emerged. The letter itself has been analyzed extensively. The writing style, vocabulary, and references suggest an educated person, possibly someone familiar with literature and theatrical writing. The jazz reference is particularly interesting, as this was during jazz's early emergence from New Orleans. Was the killer genuinely a jazz enthusiast, or was this a cruel joke, forcing the city to celebrate the very culture many victims represented? DNA evidence doesn't exist for this case, it's simply too old. The investigation was hampered by 1918 forensic limitations. Crime scene preservation was poor, evidence handling was rudimentary, and fingerprinting was still relatively new. Modern technology can't help us here. The case must be solved, if it ever is, through historical research and document analysis. What we're left with is a series of brutal attacks, a bizarre letter, a theatrical citywide response, and an unsolved mystery. The Axeman killed at least 6 people, possibly more, and wounded many others. He terrorized an entire city, manipulated the population through media, and then vanished. Whether he died, moved away, was imprisoned for other crimes, or was indeed Joseph Mumford remains unknown. This has been Crime Scout, True Stories. The Axeman of New Orleans represents a unique chapter in American crime history, a case where the killer controlled the narrative, played with his victims' fears, and ultimately escaped justice. Over a century later, we still don't know his name, but his legacy lives on in the jazz music that saved a city for one night. Subscribe for more historical mysteries where the truth remains hidden in the past.